Hi, I'm Marco Rubio, and this is our weekly installment of reaching into the mailbag and picking out some of the letters you've sent to us and answering them here on the air. We encourage you to continue to send your emails and your letters because you never know, you might get picked next. What we try to do is pick letters that are typical of the ones we've been getting, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start with an email from Karen in Coconut Creek, and here's what she writes. She writes, I heard something very disturbing to me on the news today, and that was that if the budget was not passed by August 2nd, that there would be no September Social Security checks going out. I am on disability, and I depend on my Social Security check to keep a roof over mine and my family's heads. If I don't get a check, I can't pay my rent, and then we have nowhere to live. Please, please, please pass the budget by August 2nd. Karen, I think what you're referring to is the debt limit and the president's threat a few days ago to not send out Social Security checks if he doesn't get his way on the debt limit. Let me tell you why I think it was wrong for the president to do that. First, Social Security money doesn't belong to the president. It belongs to you. It belongs to each of us who every single week or every couple weeks out of our paycheck pay money into an account. And here's the government's promise that when we retire, that money's going to be there for us. What does the debt limit have to do with that? Why does our borrowing ability have anything to do with money that should be sitting there in the bank account? After all, if all those years that you worked, you were paying money into the Social Security system, why isn't the money there? And the answer goes to the heart of the issues that we're facing as a country. It's because the government took that money. It took it years ago because it spends more money than it takes in overall. The fact is that 40 cents out of every dollar that our federal government spends here in Washington is money that we're borrowing, sometimes right out of Social Security, and it's wrong. And so what the president is admitting when he says that to you is that Social Security, along with a bunch of other things that our government pays for, are largely funded through borrowing. And so with all this debate going on about the debt limit, we need to remind ourselves that the big issue facing our country is the debt. I agree with you, Social Security shouldn't be touched, and you should get your Social Security check because it's your money, not the government's money. Here's the next email. It comes from Richard in Orlando, and Richard writes, my wife and I are registered independents but tend to vote Republican. In fact, we both voted for you. I'm writing this to ask you to encourage the Republican leadership of Congress to ensure that there is no crisis on August 2nd because there's no agreement. The actions needed to obtain approval to raise the national debt limit. It appears that the Republicans' leadership stance is our way or no way. There must be some compromise, and the president's news conference today made him sound more realistic than the Republican leadership. The Republican image was damaged by the government shutdown under Clinton and will suffer even greater damage in voters' response if there is not a suitable agreement by the August 2nd, 2011 deadline. Let your leadership know that there are Republicans in the hinterland that are prepared for some revenue increase along with spending cuts. My wife and I are prepared to have our benefits under Social Security and Medicare reduced to get the federal budget and economy righted. The Republican leadership must know that the president, who we did not vote for, is making more sense than the Republican leadership of Congress. Well, Richard, thank you for your letter and for your sentiments. Let me shed some light on this issue. First of all, the real crisis is not a failure to raise the debt limit. That's one vote away. The real crisis is not the debt limit. The real crisis is the debt. Here's the bottom line, Richard. We spend the 40 cents out of every dollar that the federal government spends is money that we're borrowing, and it's unsustainable. If you read the reports from Moody's and all these other credit agencies when they talk about downgrading and lowering America's credit rating, you know what they talk about? They don't necessarily talk about the debt limit, although they think it needs to be raised. They talk about our debt problem. They talk about the fact that Washington does not have a plan to solve the debt. And they talk about the fact and the brutal reality that if we keep doing what we're doing now in Washington, this country won't be able to pay our debt. Not because we're not raising the debt limit, but because we don't have the money. That's what's gotten these countries in Europe in trouble. And that's what's getting us in trouble here now. So the number one issue facing our country is the debt. And I want there to be a credible plan on the debt. You mentioned the president. Here's what I would say. Where's his plan? As we speak, the president has not offered a plan. Now, sure, he stood behind a podium and said he's willing to compromise. But how do we know that if he hasn't offered a plan? Where are his ideas? He talks about raising taxes. Well, which taxes? Because the taxes he's talking about raising barely raise enough money to cover 10 days' worth of deficit spending, much less $14 trillion in debt. He talks about willing to make sacrifices when it comes to Social Security and Medicare. Well, where's his plan to do that? Since the only thing he's talked about with Medicare is bashing the Ryan plan. So one thing is to stand up and say you're willing to compromise. Another thing is to literally put your money where your mouth is. And to do that, the president has to offer his plan. And he hasn't offered a plan. And if he doesn't offer a plan, then it means he's not willing to lead. And if he's not willing to lead, we can't solve generational problems like this. So I too am prepared to compromise. But the compromise has to be a solution, not just a compromise that makes everybody feel happy for 72 hours. Because if our compromise is not a solution, then the debt crisis will be much worse than the debt limit crisis will be. And none of us can afford that. Well, thank you again for your letters and your emails this week. Obviously, this is a critical time. Last week we had more emails and more letters than anyone around here can recall now or even in the past when other senators occupied this office. That means you're paying attention to the debt limit debate, and you should, because the debt issue is the single greatest generational issue we will face. And obviously, the lack of jobs is affecting all of you. And so we want to work on those issues, and we want your input, and we want your advice. Thank you again, and don't forget to write or email this week for next week's installment. God bless all of you, and God bless the United States.